every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to On the Money, where we're focused on the UK's cost of living crisis, helping you to beat the squeeze. I'm Liam Halligan, and for the next hour, we'll be talking about fresh UK growth numbers that show the economy is shrinking. We're meant to be in the midst of a sharp V-shaped post-lockdown bounce back, but the cost of living crisis is hitting spending as prices spiral. And UK manufacturers are struggling to source materials and components from overseas. We'll be discussing the economic outlook and hearing from one of the founders of perhaps the UK's leading energy switching companies. He'll have some tips on how to keep the lid on household fuel bills. All that and more on The Money after the GB News headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Liam. It's 1 o'clock. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister's spokesman has confirmed Boris Johnson's not among those to be fined by police over the Partygate saga. The Met Police says more than 50 additional fines have been issued over COVID breaches in Downing Street and other government buildings. It brings the total number of fines to more than 100. The police investigation continues. Russia's foreign ministry is warning it'll be forced to take retaliatory military steps after Finland's leaders announced their intention to join NATO. In a joint statement, the Finnish Prime Minister and President said the nation must apply for membership without delay after decades of neutrality. Sweden's also likely to follow suit. It's after the two Nordic countries signed security pacts with the UK. Moscow claims NATO's aim is to continue expanding towards Russia to threaten the country. The Finnish Foreign Minister, Pekka Haavisto, says membership would strengthen security.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine has altered the European and Finnish security environment. However, Finland is not facing an immediate military threat. Should Finland decide to apply, the accession of Finland would strengthen the security and stability of the Baltic Sea region and Northern Europe. Finland is a regional security provider and would further strengthen NATO as a future ally.
To Ukraine, the United Nations Human Rights Chief has said that over 1,000 civilian bodies have been recovered in the Kyiv region alone, and that the civilian death toll in Mariupol is in the thousands. That as there's been a massive explosion at the Azovstal steelworks in the besieged port city. Officials say Russia's pressing on with its assault on the plant. It's believed at least 100 civilians and wounded fighters are still sheltering there. A spokesman for the Prime Minister says no final decision has been made over Northern Ireland. adding Britain and the EU will continue talks and see what progress can be made in the coming days. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has been holding crunch talks with the European Commission over the post-Brexit agreement, warning if the EU doesn't show the necessary flexibility over the Northern Ireland Protocol, the UK will have no choice but to act alone. That as Boris Johnson chairs a cabinet meeting today away from Downing Street. He's expected to urge ministers to bring the benefits of the Queen's speech to life as they meet for an away day in Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire. Downing Street say they'll also discuss how the new legislation will boost the economy and level up opportunities across the country. New figures this morning show the UK economy grew by 0.8% between January and March, the slowest pace for a year. The Office for National Statistics says it's down from 1.3% in the previous 3 months. It comes amid fears the cost of living crisis may plunge the UK into recession. MPs are warning Passport Office chaos is leaving people waiting on the phone for up to 9 hours. The Home Office is facing calls to say when the backlog of passports applications will be cleared. It's also being urged to compensate those who've had to wait up to 10 weeks for theirs to be sorted. Responding to an urgent question in the House of Commons, the Home Office ministers insisted the vast majority of applications are processed well within the time frame. A Labour MP has told GB News she suffered sexual harassment whilst at Cambridge University. Stella Creasy said she was threatened with gang rape, but college authorities admonished her complaints instead of punishing the abusers. The university has apologised for what it's called a horrific ordeal, saying steps have since been taken to improve reporting incidents of abuse.
I was in a room with them all and they threatened to gang rape me. It took public humiliation and posters and finally other people coming forward and me collating the evidence of all the notes, the spitting in my room, the rubbish that was thrown at me, the sexual abuse and harassment if I tried to walk into the bar that came from this group of young men.
And you can watch the full exclusive interview with Gloria De Piero on the GB News website. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Liam and On the Money.
And coming up on The Money today, the UK economy has stalled. That's a sharp contrast as GDP falls from the post-pandemic bounce back we were meant to be enjoying. What does the slowdown mean for you, for government spending and for public services? Plus, as the cost of living squeeze tightens, is it affecting the UK's dogs, cats and hamsters? We ask if British consumers are now spending less on their pets. And each day On The Money features an in-depth Money Talks interview today. We're joined by a friend of the show, energy expert Joe Malinowski, the founder of one of the UK's first energy switching companies. We talked to Joe about where fuel prices are heading and what steps we can all take to push down on those pesky utility bills, helping you beat the squeeze. That's later in the show. And as ever, I want your questions, opinions, ideas. What do you think of the issues raised in today's On The Money? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @gbnews. I'll read out some of your messages later in the show. So stay with us because this is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan and you are On The Money. The UK economy is supposed to be booming. We're meant to be in the midst of a post-lockdown V-shaped recovery. As recently as last October, the Treasury was predicting that UK GDP, the sum total of all economic activity, would be 6% higher during 2022 than last year. Now, 6% GDP growth is, to say the least, economic boom time. The UK economy did expand by 7.5% last year, but that was the natural bounce back as we recovered after the economy collapsed during the 2020 lockdown. Prior to that, the UK economy hasn't expanded by 6% since the early 70s when I was a lad. At the time of Rishi Sunak's spring statement back in March, though, the Office of Budget Responsibility downgraded the UK's 2022 growth forecast from that 6% projection I mentioned back in October to 3.8%, reflecting the reality of ongoing supply chain snarl-ups, spiralling prices and the broader cost of living crisis. Now, from 2010 to 2019, pre-COVID days, the UK economy grew by around 2% a year on average. So a 3.8% expansion this year would still feel pretty buoyant, with the economy generating enough profits and tax to pay higher wages and higher government benefits for those on low incomes, while pumping more into health, education and all the rest of it. But new figures out this morning, they suggest that as this cost of living squeeze spirals, the downgraded 3.8% growth forecast simply isn't going to happen either. During the 3 months from January to March this year, the first quarter, the UK economy expanded by 0.8% according to new figures. That was sharply down from 1.3% growth during the previous quarter, that's October to December 2021. What's more worrying, though, is that within these first quarter numbers, GDP actually shrank by 0.1% in March as fuel and food prices soared. With war in Ukraine escalating the cost of living crisis, consumer savings-facing services, not least hospitality, they were hammered last month, shrinking by 1.8%. And industrial production also fell in March by 0.2%. Motor vehicle manufacturing is suffering more than most as car makers struggle to source materials and components from overseas. Supply chains remain broken, with global shipping yet to fully recover from lockdown and parts of China now reimposing anti-COVID restrictions. Britain remains some way from recession. That's when the economy registers 2 successive quarters, that's 6 months of economic contraction. And given that we were meant to be booming and growth underpins government spending on all our public services, news that the economy is shrinking, if only so far for a single month, is a serious worry. So that's our On the Money question today. Can the UK economy escape recession? Grown-up conversations with people who know their stuff. That's what we do here on The Money. Today it's a pleasure to welcome back Paul Sedgwick into the studio. He is the founder of Frank Investments. Great to have you with us, Paul, bringing your expertise. Down the line is Fraser Brown. He's managing director at Motorvise Automotive. We'll be reflecting on those falling car production numbers with him, and also in the studio, none other than Jasmine Birtles, MissMoneyMagpie.com. Great to have you back with us, Jasmine. Fraser, let's go to you first. I look at these GDP numbers. We see production's down 0.2% in March. Within those numbers, car manufacturing's really been hammered. Are you seeing that reflected in terms of cars that are being delivered to the firms that you cover? Are you seeing it reflected in consumers not now going for those big ticket purchases like cars, like white goods, because of the cost of living squeeze?
It's really interesting. The actual GDP figures see a 15% reduction in the automotive trade and retail sector. And that's a huge chunk, which probably contributes to taking them from a positive to a negative figure in the month of March. But the truth is that demand and consumer inquiries into car retailers throughout Q1 were actually remained strong all the way up until the end of March. The reason that the 15% decline is all about production, because the cars that were delivered and invoiced in the month of March would largely have been orders that were placed in October, November, December, or January and February, with very few being placed as orders in March because of this huge delay we have in production. We have massive gaps between order take and delivery. So that's the first thing I wanted to really get across. And I think there's 2 other areas that are very important to consider within the Q1 figures. And that is that if we go back to kind of November and December time, many businesses making decisions about what they were going to do would take, decisions about orders for Q1 in the month of November and December. But what we've seen is that nobody was prepared to make decisions at that time because we all thought we were going to go back into lockdown, because it was totally, there was no business certainty in December, because there was lots of discussion about the Omicron variant. And the final thing that I wanted to add in here, we see footfall inquiries, numbers of people going into car dealerships in our software systems that are within dealerships across the UK. And in the month of April, we have seen a drop in inquiries like we have never seen for years. So we're looking at 20 to 25% drop in inquiries into dealerships in the month of April. So that is not yet reflected in the figures that we're seeing from GDP this month.
We've heard it there from the coalface. I mean, car sales, we know that car production has been hammered over recent months. And in March, it seems, and then again in April, we've just heard from Fraser Brown, consumer demand is also stalling. There was a serious cost of living crisis anyway. War in Ukraine seems to have escalated that crisis. Are we heading for a recession?
Well, this is the big question. I mean, the stock markets, the way they're performing at the moment, seem to suggest that they feel that the probability of recession has definitely increased quite significantly. Central banks are still holding on to the hope that they can engineer a slowdown without an economic recession. I mean, we've heard Powell last week talk about that.
He's the head of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, in America.
It's very hard to see at the moment how central banks can engineer a slowdown with inflation rates running where they are and the lack of supply without creating a recession. But this is the hope that that this is what their expectation is, that they will be able to do.
We'll never know, but it's certainly the House view of this show that if central banks had moved earlier, a stitch in time saved 9 in the middle of last year to tackle inflation, which a lot of us could see would coming, then they would have more hope of doing exactly what you're talking about, Paul, trying to tame inflation without pushing the economy effectively into recession. But we will come back to that. Jasmine, on moneymagpie.com, you have many consumers who email you with inquiries about a whole host of subjects. How worried are they?
They're very worried. And I do think that much of what we're seeing at the moment, the slowdown, as it were, is because consumers are really concerned. They don't know what's going to happen. We've got uncertainty in the markets, but on a day-to-day basis, people don't know what their bills are going to be. They think they know that they're going to be higher. That's really the only certainty, that things are going to go up. So they're holding back. Why wouldn't you, frankly?
Let's just recap those numbers, because I do think they're historically quite important numbers. I mentioned them in the introduction, but let's just have another look at them. During the 3 months from January to March this year, that's the first quarter, the UK economy expanded 0.8%. That's the headline number. That sounds OK. But it was sharply down from 1.3% growth during the previous quarter, October to December 2021. But what's really concerning is that in the first quarter, GDP actually shrank by 0.1% in March. Food and fuel prices were obviously soaring given the war in Ukraine. And and within that, production also contracted by 0.2%. Let's go back to Fraser. How concerned are you, Fraser? Obviously, you're in the car dealership game. You know a great deal about the car industry. When cars aren't being made and the ability of our car makers to actually get stock out the door is compromised by those supply chain issues, and cars aren't actually being bought, that's a big chunk out of the economy, isn't it?
It is. And if we look at April in particular, and the numbers we're seeing in terms of order take, it is really starting to decline. So the future, I am concerned about it. And our big message when we're talking to our automotive dealer groups that we work with is it's, many businesses in the last kind of 12 months since the end of the lockdown have been able to be successful because there's been huge consumer demand, because consumers have had cash in their pockets. And even if you're not a particularly well-run business in the automotive sector, it's been very easy to make money in this period. We're about to move into a period where dealers are carrying big order banks from cars that have been sold in the months of October, November, January, February and March that will then be delivered throughout the rest of this year. So some dealers will be sat there thinking that they're okay because they have the order banks there. But what we're going to see is a drop in used car values, which we began to see in the month of March and really started to continue to follow a gradual reduction in the month of April. So what we're seeing seeing is a return to normality. And if business people don't kind of really get back to basics, start to manage their inquiry funnels, start to look at how they're marketing their businesses, cut costs where they need to, if we don't start to run businesses more efficiently and more leanly, you're not going to be able to continue to run a poor business and be profitable as we move into the next 6 months of 2022. So really a back to basics message is out there for business, certainly within the automotive space. That is what I'm familiar with.
Really interesting phrase, the SMMT, the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders. Their fresh numbers out, their preliminary numbers for April indeed show new car markets, new car demand down by 16%, given those supply constraints and the impact on consumer sentiment of this cost of living squeeze. Let's go back to you, Paul. You're very much a financial markets guy. A lot of our viewers and listeners, some will have stocks and shares, some will have pensions, but the stock market won't be the focus of their day every day. But we all know, don't we, if the stock market starts to fall, that impacts investment, that impacts sentiment. That's a kind of signal as well as a cause of a broader economic turndown. We had a pretty hairy market over recent days. What do you think is going to happen in the weeks and months ahead as the world now has to face up to the fact that this cost of living squeeze is really serious, the worst in 40 years, and war in Ukraine isn't helping?
No, well, I think that stock markets are considered to be forward-looking vehicles. They look at not what's going on at the moment. If you actually look at the US economy, it's actually not doing too badly at this moment in time. You know, unemployment is low, growth is reasonably robust, the PMI looking forward, the leading indicators are still remaining, they're slow.
But corporate earnings are getting squeezed because costs are going through the roof.
Absolutely, and they're struggling to pass these costs on. You're absolutely right about that. And so the stock market is already starting to worry about the fact that there will be an economic recession at some point in the future. And as you quite rightly said, I mean, I think Fraser's comments and insights were fascinating to learning, because it is a real window.
Don't tell him, that's why we get him on.
It was a tremendous window on what's going on in the economy at the moment, and how central banks are trying to slow demand because they can't affect the supply side of the equation at the moment.
That's the logistics, the fact that shipping is dislocated still from lockdown, the fact that the Chinese are locking down Beijing, Shanghai, all their big production centres, factories shuttered in the world's biggest manufacturer.
They can't do anything about it. All they can do is slow down demand, and what they're trying to do is slow down demand just enough to... But then there's all these external factors you said about, you know, the rising oil prices, the rising fuel prices, the rising food prices that they're also having to deal with at the same moment in time. And you asked me about whether they should have raised interest rates last year. Well, everybody with hindsight says, of course, they should have done. They didn't... Some of the impacts that have squeezed prices further higher, they couldn't foresee, for example, the Ukrainian war and that sort of thing. But with hindsight, obviously, they should have started earlier.
Hold that thought, Paul, because we will continue this discussion after the break here on The Money. We'll be talking about what we think the government can do to reach out and help consumers who are pressed by this cost of living squeeze. Will there be an emergency budget? Could have some political gossip on that, so stay with us. This is Liam Halligan on GB News, and you're on The Money.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us. 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, but to the point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're on the money. It's 1:22. Now, Britain's economy shrank in March as consumers cut back on spending in the face of the rising cost of living. That's according to the latest official statistics. And just yesterday, Charles Goodhart, London School of Economics professor, he warned MPs that the UK will probably go through a mild recession. His words, very respected economist. So we're asking, can the UK actually escape recession? I'm still with my expert panel. Paul Sedgwick of Frank Investments, let's go back to you. A lot of people are concerned about how they're going to beat the squeeze. A lot of people are concerned for their livelihoods.
Yeah.
Over and above all of that, there are these really difficult decisions that central banks are making around the world. Stock markets have been very jittery in recent days. If stock markets collapse or correct significantly, as we say in the jargon, that will put a downer on economic sentiment, making the economics of the real world, if you like, even worse. Where do you think we are now in terms of central banks responding to this crisis? What can they do to make things better? Anything?
Well, they're in a very difficult position, I think, because they're having to react. If you take aside the supply side issues that they couldn't necessarily foresee.
These supply chain issues, yeah.
That they couldn't necessarily foresee, and that they hoped would sort themselves out fairly quickly, and that was the reason that they didn't react as quickly as they could have done, possibly with hindsight. But the answer to your question is there's not a lot they can do. I mean, if you look at the fact that the real interest rates are sort of minus 5%, which in the historic
So that's interest rate minus inflation. Right. Which the actual real return you get on your money.
So you can borrow, in theory, money at 1% and invest it in things that are rising prices at 6%.
Yeah.
That should be huge.
Yeah, that should be huge. Entrepreneurs should be going nuts to invest.
But obviously it's not working out like that. So what central banks have got to do is but what we have lived through a period of with the last couple of years is where governments have borrowed, spent and taxed. And that is historically inflationary, that is historically can lead to economic recessions so what I personally believe is that this talk about its budget, and we were talking about it a minute ago, this emergency budget, the fiscal burden that people have had to bear in the last few years has got to be eased, and we've got to look at ways of helping the entrepreneur stimulate the economy and help the economy grow back through investment and that sort of thing, and that's got to come from some of the reversals, some of the tax policies that we've introduced.
Jasmine Birtles, MissMoneyMagpie.com. So I was with Graham Brady last night. He's the chairman of the 1922 committee, very influential Conservative backbencher. He is now calling openly for what GB News has been calling for a long time, scrapping VAT on fuel bills of 5%. It is only 5%, but on the £2,000 average fuel bill, that's 100 quid. That's worth having. There is now a mood on the backbenches to force the Prime Minister, to force the Chancellor to cut taxes and or do some kind of emergency budget. The Treasury is saying, no, we're going to wait until we see the extent to which fuel bills are going to go up in October when Ofgem resets the price cap. They can't wait that long, can they?
No, they can't. I think we all know it's going to go up. End of. It is going to go up. And this is what consumers are expecting. We're expecting, frankly, everything to go up at the moment. So we would like to see action. most people, I think, were quite disappointed by the Queen's speech because there wasn't anything about, how to help people with their bills. And this is the number one concern that everybody has. Yes, they're worried about Ukraine. There are all sorts of things that concern them. But the number one thing is their bills, the cost of living. Will they be able to heat and eat? That's literally where we're at. So I think even if from a political point of view, I would suggest that the government does that and just says, look, we're on it. We're doing something. Here's what we're going to do, and actually show some genuine action. Then I think the electorate would think, all right, we'll give you a few more months.
Fraser Brown, let's go back to you. You are the boss of Motorvise Automotive. You deal with lots of car companies, car manufacturers, car sellers and so on. You have a really good handle across an industry that does employ tens of thousands of people. What's the sentiment among the business leaders, the investors, the entrepreneurs that you come across each and every day? Do you think there's appetite for some kind of emergency budget?
Well, I think it's very important the government does something, and the reason for that is because the statistics that we see, if you think about it, the biggest purchase anybody ever makes is a house, and houses take months to transact, so it's a very delayed economic indicator. The second biggest thing anybody ever purchases is a car, and we see normally these SMMT figures are a very quick reflection of what's going on with consumer demand, because the relationship historically between an order on a car and delivery of a car has been very close. That isn't the case at the moment because there's long lead times because of the semiconductor shortages and also because of supply chain issues around products produced in Ukraine. So one of the biggest things that we are seeing, and I'll repeat what I said previously, is a 20%, roughly 20% reduction in inquiries coming into car showrooms. And we see that on the systems that we have in car dealerships across the land. And that is invariably the first thing that you see that is a very clear indicator of where the economy is going. And every time in the last 25 years, whilst I've been in the motor industry, I've seen inquiries decline to that extent. It has been followed by a recession. So I think everything that's been done to date has slowed things down. We've damped down inflation, we've damped down lots of things, and that we're at the point now where we need to start doing something to stimulate the economy and to get things going back in the right direction. Because in our industry, we're one of the first people to see, the first industry to see what's really happening on the ground. And April was a significant reduction in consumer demand for one of the biggest purchases people make. So yes, we need action. The motor trade's a very, very resilient business. We've got really great balance sheets, and I think that business leaders are not too concerned in terms of, is it still a good bet? Yes, it still is a very great business to invest in. But I think the government needs to take action because it could quite easily see energy prices drop and things start to turn quite quickly if the government takes actions now.
If consumers stay at home, I mean, we are very much a consumer-driven economy in this country. If consumers aren't spending, if they are properly spooked by this cost of living squeeze, and it is the most serious since the early 1950s, then recession's inevitable, isn't it?
Well, it's much more likely. You have seen today's figures clearly demonstrate that the consumer is not spending on the discretionary side and putting off buying a new car for another 6 months. And that's what, in a way, that's why inflation, governments, central banks slow down demand, prices come down, you'll see car prices start to ease a little bit and you'll see demand start to ease off and then inflation rates start to fall. I mean, we have seen, the oil price at least is no higher than it was when the Ukrainian war started.
Just around $100 a barrel.
Around $100 a barrel, having spiked to 120. Yeah. And if you do get, if I wanted to paint a more optimistic picture,
absolutely,
one could say, well, if there is a bit of an economic slowdown, you could see oil prices back to $80 to $85 a barrel, then you'll start to see, and then you've already seen copper prices fall, you've already seen iron ore prices fall. So you could see in the second half of the year a easing of inflation rates. You did see yesterday in the US, it did fall a little bit, but not quite as much by people expecting. But there were some signs that inflation rates are starting to ease in the US. You could start to see central banks getting a little bit more dovish possibly, and then you could get some fiscal stimulus. And then hopefully maybe there's a possibility that the economy will start to pick up again.
Jasmine, Paul Sedgwick of Frank Investments paints a modestly optimistic picture there amidst a lot of economic quite alarming numbers, and he's right to do so, because it could go either way.
Yeah.
But even if stock markets do remain buoyant, even if we do get those slightly better global trends that Paul's referring to, even if China does come out of lockdown, it's pretty clear that the cost of living squeeze is going to remain pretty tight in the UK for at least the next 3 to 6 months.
Well, at least I think, I do think, like they said, there's a lot of rot in the system. We've had so much money printing. That's got to go somewhere. I was just thinking, about the house prices. House prices are still massively inflated, in my view. It'll be interesting to see what happens to those in the next 6 months. It's all to play for. But I think for the consumer, and that's the people that I deal with mostly, they are worried, and they are not going to be spending much at all in the next 6 to 12 months, I think, until they can see which way the wind's blowing.
Jasmine Birdsall's MissMoneyBuy.com, great to have you with us.
Thank you.
Paul Sedgwick of Frank Investments, you're always welcome on the show. And indeed, Fraser Brown of Motorvise Automotive, thank you for your fascinating insights from the front line of our car manufacturing and car retailing business. This is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. Coming up, it's my Money Talks interview with Joe Malinowski, friend of the show and founder of the energy comparison site, The Energy Shop. He's got over 20 years' experience in the industry under his belt. And Joe reveals why he thinks the energy crisis, I'm afraid, is only set to worsen in the coming months. That's after the GB News headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Liam. It's 1:33, your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The Met Police has issued more than 50 additional fines over parties held in Downing Street and other government buildings during lockdown. The Prime Minister's spokesperson confirmed none of the latest referrals have been issued to Boris Johnson. He, his wife Carrie, along with the Chancellor, were hit with fixed penalty notices last month. It brings the total number of fines to more than 100. Russia's foreign ministry is warning it'll be forced to take retaliatory military steps after Finland announced their intention to join NATO. In a joint statement, the Finnish Prime Minister and President said the nation must apply for membership without delay after decades of neutrality. Sweden's also likely to follow suit. Moscow claims NATO's aim is to continue expanding towards Russia to threaten the country. To Ukraine, the United Nations Human Rights Chief has said over 1,000 civilian bodies have been recovered in the Kiev region alone, and that the civilian death toll in Mariupol is in the thousands. Earlier, there was another large explosion at the Azovstal steelworks in the besieged port city. Boris Johnson's chairing a cabinet meeting today in Stoke-on-Trent in Staffordshire. He's expected to urge ministers to bring the benefits of the Queen's speech to life. The cabinet will discuss how the new legislation will boost the economy and level up opportunities across the country. Shadow MPs are warning Passport Office chaos is leaving people waiting on the phone for up to 9 hours. The Home Office faces demands to reveal when the backlog of passport applications will be cleared and to compensate those that have had to wait up to 10 weeks or more for theirs to be sorted. The Home Office ministers insisted the vast majority of applications are processed well within the time frame. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.22 to the dollar, the pound is 1.17 to the euro, and the price of gold currently stands at £1,511.17 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for real-time investment.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather updates. Dry, bright and a bit breezy sums up the weather for most today. It won't be completely dry. There will be some showers across western Scotland and Northern Ireland caused by this little weather feature which is slowly drifting in. For most places, though, it is going to be a fairly benign kind of weather day. Yes, there's a fair bit of cloud around, but some places seeing some decent spells of sunshine, parts of eastern England in particular, and at times across parts of northern England, some sunshine on the south coast as well. But generally a lot of cloud, but a lot of dry weather for England, Wales and eastern Scotland. But northwest Scotland's staying fairly soggy, and there'll be a few showers drifting into the west of Northern Ireland and southwest Scotland. A cooler feel here as well, with a brisk breeze. Elsewhere, temperatures around average, high teens, maybe up to 20 in the sunshine across Essex and Kent. As we go through this evening, we'll see a bit more of that showery rain drifting south through southern Scotland into northern England, North Wales, maybe even a shower or two over Lincolnshire and the Midlands for a time. But that all scoots away by dawn, and again, most of us will start Friday dry. Quite a mild night, double digits in many towns and cities. On to Friday, and quite a lot of clouds. Certainly initially, the sunshine fairly hazy over England and Wales, but generally a fine day here. Dry and bright too for Northern Ireland with some sunshine. Again, it'll be northwestern parts of Scotland that see the rain, spreading more widely across the Northern Isles through the day. Quite soggy across the Highlands, but through the central belt, southern Scotland, most places dry. Plenty of afternoon sunshine across England and Wales, and a warmer day as well. Temperatures could get up to 23 across the eastern parts of England. There will be a bit more of a breeze blowing during Friday, but still very pleasant conditions through Friday evening. Still a few scattered showers across the northwest, but for most places, high pressure is moving in during Friday, and that will bring most of us a fine day on Saturday as well, with some warm sunshine. There is the likelihood, though, of some thunderstorms coming up from the south on Saturday night and Sunday.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
And welcome back. Now, if you purchased an animal during lockdown, you're definitely not alone. Thousands of Brits bought a furry friend while stuck at home, not least as so many of us, well, we were in need of some company. But with the cost of living crisis worsening each day, the price of pet food's going up along with everything else, of course. And some owners simply can't afford to look after their animals. Here's some pictures of my two dogs. That's Milo and Mishka. I think we can bring them up on the screen. Can we get to see Milo and Mishka? Or maybe not. Well, they're not in danger of being given away just yet, unless, of course, they decide to dig up my garden this summer. But staff at the Thornbury Animal Sanctuary in Sheffield, they report there is now a worrying trend of people giving away their pets. The sanctuary's looking after more than ever, as GB News Yorkshire and Humber reporter Anna Riley has been finding out.
Thornbury Animal Sanctuary in South Yorkshire is struggling to care for the influx of pets that have been handed over to them by their owners due to the rising costs of living. Helen Connolly is the general manager at the charity. She says the centre in Sheffield has seen a huge increase in dogs and rabbits and has reached maximum capacity.
Currently, we have every kennel full. We've got dogs in foster homes with our volunteers, and staff members have got dogs and cats and rabbits that they've taken on foster, just so that we can take in everything we can, basically. Cost of living is certainly up there. We've seen people have other commitments that they perhaps didn't have before. The veterinary fees, I think when people have bought dogs through lockdown, they've not kind of factored in that insurance is really expensive for animals, and if something does go wrong and a dog needs an operation, then that can quickly escalate into the thousands.
Thornbury is also feeling the financial pinch, with the animals being brought in getting more and more expensive for the sanctuary to look after. Jed Jenkins-Omar is the fundraising manager at the sanctuary, which relies wholly on public donations.
The rise of cost of living has had an impact, because if you look at our energy bills, for example, last month they're almost double now, so they're touching nearly £3,000 last month. So this winter they're obviously just going to go through the roof, as it's due to increase again. Transportation costs have had an effect on things like animal feed, wood pellets over at our farm. Financially, it's always obviously a struggle for any animal sanctuary. We've had to take on new staff to help with the demand of the animals. We've recently took on a vet, which is the first time we've ever had a vet at Thornbury. So we're really pleased and proud about that, but also it does add additional costs. The team is growing, so that's great, but obviously that does come at a price.
The animal sanctuary is calling on people in the region like Anne Coxton to volunteer their time at the centre.
Staff do a fantastic job, but we do need volunteers, really desperately need volunteers in cattery, kennels, small animals. You know, they can't do everything, so they do need us.
As bills continue to rise, staff at the charity here are urging people to think twice about whether they can afford it before buying or adopting pets. Anna Riley, GB News, Sheffield.
Time now for my daily interview series. It's Money Talks, and my guest is Joe Malinowski. He's the founder of the energy comparison site, The Energy Shop. Now, regular viewers and listeners will know that Joe's often joined us on The Money to give his take on the current energy crisis, helping consumers to beat the squeeze. But today we've decided to spend a bit more time tapping into his expertise. After graduating with a degree in chemistry, Joe worked in the city as an investment analyst before taking the plunge and setting up his own company, Unravel It, in the late 1990s. Along with USwitch, Unravel It was the UK's first energy comparison site, and paved the way for The Energy Shop, which Joe then founded in 2003. He's had 2 decades in the industry, and Joe's encountered challenges from both energy companies and the regulatory authorities, but he remains as determined as ever to help consumers, especially during this difficult time. So here he is, Joe Malinowski, my latest guest on Money Talks. Joe, great to have you in the studio. You've made a big contribution to the show since we began On the Money back in September, so I'm delighted to have a bit more time with you today. Tell us about your company. What is it that you're trying to do?
Well, the Energy Shop is an online price comparison, and back in the day, not so long ago, was also a switching service. So what we actually do is we source data, price data, product data from all the energy companies. We assemble it, collate it, store it in databases, and allow consumers to come into the website or online or via their phones to be able to just input certain elements about their property, where they live, how much energy they use. If this, we make estimates based on industry data, and then it shows them a list of all the available offers in their region for the type of products they're interested in. And in a lot of cases, they will be able to just say if they like the deal, they will be able to fill in a form, and it would be transferred to the energy supplier, who would then pick it up and execute the switch. And in the space of 3 weeks, typically, you would have normally saved yourself £300 or like 20, but that £300 was 20% back in the day, in a matter of moments, just by literally moving from cutting the price of energy by moving from one product with one supplier to a different product with another supplier.
Just before we carry on our discussion, let's have a little look at where the off-gem energy price cap has been in recent months. It is, of course, crucial to our discussion. So from October 2021, the cap on the average household bill was raised to £1,277 a year by the off-gem energy regulator, and the cap was increased again at the start of April to £1,970. These are caps on average prices. It's a rise of almost £700 a year, 54%, affecting 22 million households. And we expect, of course, don't we, Joe, because these price rises, the cap rises, reflect wholesale energy prices, not least wholesale gas prices, which still generates 40 or 50% of our electricity here in the UK. We expect the cap to go up again in October from that, on top of that 54% increase we saw in April. And that October price cap is likely to be announced in August. Correct. That's what we expect to happen. What do you expect that price cap to be?
Well, there are some scare stories going around the market, and they are scare stories at the moment. They could be as high as £3,000. But as things stand at the
just
current
under
time,
2,000 at the moment.
But as things stand at the current time, based on where wholesale prices are, and based on what we expect in addition to wholesale prices. So don't forget, every time a supplier goes bust, their customers get taken over by a supplier of last resort. And the credit balances, plus any cost that the new supplier takes on, are guaranteed to be paid back. And that supplier sends a bill to Ofgem approves it, and the costs then get added back to everybody's bill. So in addition to the wholesale cost, you've got these increased costs of supply failures. Taking all that into consideration, we would expect the price cap to go to above 2,500.
Right.
It's another big
at least
increase.
£500-600 on from where we currently are.
As things stand,
yeah.
But if the supply situation tightens further, and we found out just yesterday, now with in Ukraine, they're starting to cut off certain supplies from Russia. So whereas we're typically looking at what would Europe do about stopping buying Russian gas, what could the Russians do about cutting off gas as a countermeasure, we now find there's actually a third actor, which is Ukraine in the middle, who is the largest transit network of gas pipelines.
All the gas pipelines,
in the world.
Yeah.
Now saying that they're a player, and they could actually force the hand of these two parties by actually slowing down supplies. Now, if we get any disruptions on that side, it could really scare markets, it could spike prices, and the risks are on the upside, I would say, from that.
And I often hear politicians say rather smugly, but we only get 5% of our gas from Russia. That's actually disingenuous, isn't it? Because it's a regional market for gas, and if Germany's paying more for their gas, we're paying more for our gas because we're sort of at the end of the European gas complex, even though most of our gas, or a big chunk of our gas, comes from Norway across the Lagerland pipeline. So it strikes me, as long as there's geopolitical upheaval going on, then gas prices are likely to at least stay high. So you are likely to get an increase in that price cap in August.
Announced in August, to increase in October, almost certainly. I mean, theoretically, it is still possible. Theoretically, the price cap could come down. But practically, that would need, a cessation of the war.
We'd need a big fall in wholesale gas prices pretty soon.
And the conditions that would arise from that is almost impossible to imagine, given what's going on in the war in Ukraine. However, the increase is coming, and it's almost certainly going to be in October. And you're absolutely right. Despite the fact that we are not reliant on Russian supplies, because gas is freely traded in open wholesale markets, the price we pay for that, the price we pay for the gas that goes from other supplies, is affected by the whole thing, and that's what's pushing the price up.
We just saw some pictures there of the North Sea. Obviously, ministers are now giving more licences to drill for both oil and gas in the North Sea. But, of course, that's all way in the long term. That's years away to impact wholesale energy prices now. I mean, it's so difficult, isn't it? We're sitting here, we're trying to analyse the geopolitics of it. We're trying to say where that price cap might go. But viewers and listeners are screaming at their televisions and radio saying, but what do we do? What can we do? Back in the day when there was, lots of competition among these energy providers, a switching service, punters they were in the, they had power, they could switch, couldn't they? But now prices are going up for everyone. It's almost as if there's no competition anymore. It's just up, 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 and consumers seem powerless.
There is absolutely no competition, and as long as wholesale prices are rising, because the price cap lags where wholesale markets are going, as long as the price cap is on an upward trend, companies at the present time cannot offer prices below the level of the price cap. So we need to see a situation where the price cap has topped out, which might happen in October, it may not.
At the moment, it's a floor rather than a ceiling, isn't it?
Absolutely right. And so consumers are technically protected for short periods of time, but what happens instead of the energy price, their energy bills going up in small increments so they can see it and maybe do something about it, they basically get hit by these huge step changes, which are extremely painful because sometimes people just don't see them coming. And, by the time they're 2 or 3 months into it and seeing the direct debits go through the roof, then, of course, they may be already too late. They're getting behind the curve here, so to speak. So, when will things change? Well, we need to see a topping out of wholesale prices, and we need to see some stability, because it's not just the theoretically, could companies come back in and offer cheaper products? It's will they want to when volatility is so high? Because not only now, if you go into the future and the price cap allows them to offer cheaper product, the point is they might decide they want to take a customer and offer him a £2,000 bill when the price cap is $2,500. The customer says, great.
But what if prices spike again, then...
No, but what if prices then fall to £1,000? Suddenly that company is left holding on to £2,000 worth of energy they've paid for.
I see.
And they've lost the customer. They can only sell it back in the market for £1,000. And so we are now in a risk of, whereas the energy price cap killed half the industry, wholesale prices plus the energy price, killed half the suppliers in the industry on the way up, it could kill a few more on the way down. And that makes it a very, very difficult environment in which for competition to even think about coming back. So it's going to be tough for consumers for a while yet.
Consumers should obviously check if they're eligible for benefits to help them with their heating bills. They should also call their providers, but we're hearing lots of providers, they're limiting the hours that their helplines are available. What's your experience of the big energy companies, how they're dealing with customers who are ringing up and saying, look, I need a reprieve here, I simply can't pay these bills?
Yeah, well, so the companies are obligated to listen to your claims and make measures available to try and see you through. That doesn't necessarily help because it, again, extends the pain, just like the energy rebates is effectively a loan. So these are just extended payment terms. It's going to be a problem. Companies are clearly facing a huge increase in calls. They expect to see a huge increase in bad debts. That's why you're seeing this uproar from the energy industry, pushing, asking, begging almost for interventions from Rishi Sunak to step in and do something more, because if the pain isn't relieved on consumers from government intervention, it starts to fall on the energy companies. It falls on their bad debts. They've been hit by the energy price cap. They've already lost a ton of money. If they haven't gone bust, they're about to get hit with bad debt. So it's a mess. It's a mess, and it's not going to get better certainly in the next 6 months.
Well, look, Joe, we'll carry on covering this story, of course. We'll carry on covering the fact that ministers are now saying to energy companies, why are you overcharging on your direct debits? Why are you using consumers as bank account, as cash machines? But we really appreciate your expertise here on the show, and we look forward to seeing you back on the money sometime soon. Joe Malinowski of The Energy Shop, my latest guest here on Money Talks. Lots of you emailing about today's show. Richard says the present situation has been 3 decades in the making. Yes, a recession's unavoidable. I wouldn't say that. And yes, there will be an emergency budget. I agree. Of course, VAT on energy must go right now. Deborah, there's 100% needs to be an emergency budget, she says. Help's needed for the sick, disabled, pensioners and those out of work. Lots of MPs would agree. Mark says, it just goes to prove lockdowns were huge mistakes, which we'll all have to live with for years. Millions of us will be hurting for a long time. And Daniel, recession isn't always negative, says Daniel. It's just a natural part of the cycle of economics. It's not a bad thing that people are purchasing less services they can no longer afford. Entrepreneurship should be able to cope and provide physical goods that have a real value to the consumer. Thanks for all your emails today. Keep them coming. But that's all we got time for Thanks for joining me. I'll be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. because this is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and that was On the Money.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather updates. Dry, bright and a bit breezy sums up the weather for most today. It won't be completely dry. There will be some showers across western Scotland and Northern Ireland caused by this little weather feature which is slowly drifting in. For most places,